Instead, we have to go, okay, I can't see it right now, but I'm going to choose to believe. And it's easier to choose to believe when it feels like it's easy to believe and you have permission to believe, which is why we must stay in that state of wonder. So how do we stay in that state of wonder? By staying aware of the magic that is all around us. Roald Dahl famously said, those who don't believe in magic will never find it. It affirms what I'm talking about. A lot of people will say, well, I don't see any magic, so you show me some magic and then I'll believe in it. Well, if the magic is already there. The problem with your inability to see it is because you don't believe in it first.
Hello, friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. This is the show where I talk with people who are trying to live a meaningful life. People who give a damn. My guest this week is Harris III. Harris began his career at a young age traveling the world as an award-winning professional illusionist. Harris has performed for and spoken live to millions of people in dozens of countries all around the world. A series of unfortunate events led Harris on a decade-long journey to understand the stories we tell ourselves and how they drive all human behavior. Since then, Harris has created some pretty incredible things. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Wonder Switch, a book about the difference between limiting your life and living your dream. And we spend a large chunk of our time today talking about this book. Harris has also created the Wonder Mindset Masterclass, the annual Story Conference, Transformation Theory, and so much more. Harris, like me, always seems to have 47 and a half plates spinning in the air, and he does a hell of a job keeping them all spinning. During our chat, we talk about faith and failure and how impossible is just an opinion, how flying solo is just a myth, and how worry is a misuse of our imagination, and so much more. Before we jump into this conversation, a quick reminder that you can, anytime and for any reason, email me at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love hearing from you. And now, let's get right into my conversation with the incredible Harris III. Let's go. Super excited to have Harris III on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today. Welcome, Harris.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be with you finally.
Yes. We see each other once a year, not counting this pandemic year, but we run into each other at something, right?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. The last thing I saw you at was, and we'll get to that at some point in the show, is this documentary you made, Counterfeit, right? Which was tremendous. And I saw the premiere, I guess it's called, and that was such a great night. But yeah, when I first moved to Nashville 4-ish years ago, you were somebody that came up over and over again as people were opening their Rolodexes, as it were, saying, who you should meet, who you need to get in touch with, who you need to know in this city. Your name kept coming up over and over and over again. So,
I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah, that's a testament to, who you are and what you're doing in this city. There's a lot of people that are doing a lot of crazy stuff in the city, right? But the people that I was around, when I said, hey, who should I meet? Introduce me to people, your name kept coming up. So that's good. Good for you that you're working in a way that people are like, hey, you need to know Harris.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's encouraging.
Yeah. What part of town do you live in?
We're in the same Forest Hills now. So we just moved from East Nashville to Forest Hills, kind of north of Brentwood, next to Green Hills.
Yeah.
Our kids were very close to getting run over by bird scooters multiple times at our old place. So yeah, we just wanted to get them some space so they could run around and have a little bit more of a childhood similar to mine, which is what I wanted from them. So we're a little bit more spread out now on some land with a big forest behind our house. So they finally got their treehouse and trails, and they're having a blast.
I've seen you post from time to time at the new place, and it looks amazing, right? And very not East Nashville-ish. I remember where your office was in East Nashville. Was the house close to there? Did you guys live close to the office? Yeah, it's a busy part of town where, it was south enough on Gallatin, that there's still a lot of tourists that are walking around and doing stuff. And just people, it's not really a neighborhood, right? Because a lot of transient people coming through. It's a different kind of neighborhood, but you're not, if you're looking for that sitting on your front porch, waving at people that you know, that's not going to happen. It's a whole
we
lot
were
of
excited.
people.
We were excited to be there, because we could walk. We were on West Eastland, which was kind of a main thoroughfare. So people would get off a major parkway to come into East Nashville through our street, and just, cars flying at like 65 miles per hour with cars parked on both sides of the street,
Yeah.
and kids outside running around. Not a lot of kids, mostly just my kids, but yeah, it got a little crazy at times, and we loved that we could walk to Barista Parlor or Moss Tacos, or walk to the end of the street and grab a burger from the pharmacy. But yeah, it was a really fun chapter of our lives, and there's certain things that we miss about it. And it was just, we were ready for more space. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you got it. So let's talk about this. Let's start with just this last 12 months. I want to know how you're doing, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. Like, so many things have changed, right? We'll get into your story here in a minute, but you went from being on the road a ton, like your work requires, and now we're finding out not so much, right? But still, before these last 12 months, your work and my work required being in places at certain times doing things, right? So kids would see us on FaceTime, and my kids saw me for the first 7 years of their lives, for a couple of them, like on FaceTime for a lot of the month, and then I'd be home, right, and really into their lives, but a lot of time was away. So this year has changed everything. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing pretty well, and it depends on the day. I've not been asked that question recently, so it's a really good question, and I don't often know if I've done enough processing, which is, even there's a conversation even in that. It's like, what is it about me that stays so busy that often doesn't pause long enough to check in with myself and say, how you doing? But I've tried to become more self-aware, especially over the last couple of years. It's been last 2 years specifically as a leader have been a huge season of growth for me. And part of that is just trying to become more self-aware about who I am, what I'm really doing, why am I doing the things that I'm doing, and how am I doing? And I think I'm doing really well. There are days where, like my friends know me as, like, I don't think they would use the phrase Mr. Positivity, but I'm kind of wide awake to wonder, and I kind of have a childlike perspective on the world, and just about anything is possible. And it's easy for me to believe in other people and the possibility of their own dreams. It's easy for me to believe in the possibility of my own dreams. And I think with that comes this, like, man, I'm good. And I'm great. Like, sure, things are hard, but we're making it work, and we're getting through, and we're innovating and pivoting. And, I'm not ruled by fear for the most part in my life. I tend to launch things pretty easily and quickly, without being paralyzed by fear. It doesn't mean the fear doesn't exist. I just courageously do it in the face of fear. But it doesn't mean that doing that constantly doesn't mean that there's not a presence of other emotions or feelings. I just don't pause often enough to check in with those feelings. But when I do, I feel them hard. That's what I'm learning over the last couple of months, is like, and I feel like I was the guy cheering everyone on, going, hey, we can get through this. It's all going to be okay. Let's stay positive, not just for positivity's sake, but all of the science that comes along with an optimistic view on the world. Let's stay rooted in wonder. And then everyone's like, okay, great. And then they get through, like, I think we're on the tail end of this thing. I'm starting to feel good. I dug out of my funk. And then right around the time everyone was coming out of their funk, I think I was going into one for the first time. This is recent, only within the last few weeks or couple of months. And I think it's like everyone was doing these little sprints, and then they were really tired, and it was hard not to sink into some sort of negative headspace. And I think while everyone else was doing short sprints, getting bursts of encouragement, bursts of hope, I've been on like a hope marathon. And now the marathon has been completed, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm really tired. And like, I'm mentally and emotionally drained.
Yeah.
And so, I think my friend Brad called it pivot fatigue. I think everyone's talking about Zoom fatigue. I think I just have pivot fatigue. I think it just hit me later than it hit many. And so I think many found ways to cope with it or heal from it, and are finding ways to come out of it. I think I'm just now arriving at it. Does that make sense at all?
Makes total sense. At the same time that I'm grateful that when this pandemic started, that I did not sit still, right? The first couple months when everybody thought it was going to be a few weeks, right? Those first few weeks, everybody's talking about what? Like staying home, making sourdough bread, watching Netflix, right? Like that's what everybody was talking about. I was starting new stuff. This past year, I started a nonprofit fund in two more companies, right? Like, and it sounds like you're on the same trajectory. You've been doing a lot of the same stuff. So I didn't really, I've never been to therapy a day in my life. And that is not a good thing because I go super hard and it's not like I honestly don't think it's me trying to not listen to what's going on inside. I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do. And there's a lot to do, right? There's a lot to make. And as long as I'm good with my wife and my family, right? As long as we're in sync and they don't think that I'm working too hard and that I'm still giving them the attention and love and care that they deserve and more, I just keep making stuff because I don't know, life is so fragile and short and I want to make shit, right? But in that, I did not, yeah, I've just been going super hard. And I, like you, so right around the turn of the year, because everybody's talking about, 2021 was such a terrible, or 2020 was such a terrible year. 2021 is going to be way better. Well, we're 3 months in. The pandemic still, at least here in this country, is looking pretty bleak still. Yes, the vaccines are coming, but there's variants and mutations and all these things that we have yet to figure out. And so I think the turn of the year, I also took on a new client. I was talking about this before the recording went on, where now for 30, I added 30 hours of work a week on my previous workload, working with all these amazing scientists on this COVID project. So now every single day I'm in these conversations, not at a social media level, not at a, neighbors talking with each other about how they feel, but I'm talking with the people that know what the hell they're talking about, the people that are in all the data, that are just looking at all these graphs all day long and they're predicting what is going to happen, right? Or could happen. And so I too have been feeling it really deeply these last couple of weeks, like workload, thinking that 2020 would be different. And I do believe the latter part will be, and I'm very hopeful for that, but still very much in it, right? I just had to, so I've officiated 4 or 5 of my siblings' weddings so far, which has been like the biggest honor of my life.
Wow.
And my first sister I'm one of 12 kids, so that's why there's so many already. My first sister is getting married, and she asked me naturally if I would officiate, and I felt so honored. And she asked me last year, and we thought, well, for sure things are going to look different right now, right? And she was open to, eloping, like courthouse kind of wedding, and then we'll do the big party later, or like maybe just family. And I was open to those options. Just, things are still pretty tense, right? But then they decided, and that's their right. I'm not speaking ill of her. I've told her this a million times, like, but they went ahead and invited the 100, plus people. And so I had to make the hard decision to say, I can't be there, right? And that was so hard to process through all the intricacies of, going into a different state, into a bunch of different people's, quarantine pods. Like all of that is weighing right now, right? I still feel positive. I still feel good. I'm still building a lot of stuff, but it's hard. It's hard. I think for those of us that like go super hard, when we actually, so I think of it this like this. If I'm moving, if I'm in motion, I can work, I try not to, but I could work 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day. Like I could just go, kids go to bed, wife goes to bed. I come back out to the office, do my thing for 2 or 3 more hours. But I'm at that point in my life, in the pandemic, in the year, that if I stop, like if I sit on the couch for 10 minutes, I just, my brain begins to shut off a little bit, and I just like melt into the couch and can't even get up, right? Because I don't feel like I'm exhausted, but my body is telling me otherwise. My spirit is telling me otherwise, So it's a weird time.
Yeah, but I think we need that. We need those pauses to remind us of how tired we are. We weren't wired for the hustle culture that we're surrounded by as human beings. We are absolutely human beings and not human doings. But I'm currently still, I would say, a better human doing than I am a human being, because I don't know that I've mastered the art or even come close to mastery of learning how to just be. And so the few little glimpses I get of just being still serve as a reminder to me of how much work I have to do in that area. So the times that I melt into the couch, it's like, hey, this is good. Like you were designed to do this. You were made to rest. And it's okay for you to pause and rest every now and then. So maybe you should do a little bit more of this more often.
Yeah.
So we weren't just made for that constant hustle. We also
So
weren't made
true.
for the lonely hustle. And so when you combine hustling with loneliness and isolation, dude, that is a really dangerous cocktail.
Absolutely. And we will get to that. That is a part of our forthcoming conversation. Before we get like super into it, I'm sure many people are meeting you for the first time on this show. And I'm so grateful to be the one to introduce everyone because I think I want people to follow you and, begin learning from you from here on out. Give them some context for who you are. Who are the important people, places, and things in your life? Where did you come from? How did you get into the kind of work that you're doing? Give us some of that context, some story context here as we begin.
Oh man.
I know it's a huge question.
Yeah. It could take a while. So feel free to pause or tell me to just pull out like a remote control and you can fast forward or pause and rewind and be like, go back to that.
There you go.
I mean, I grew up in Southeast Tennessee. So just a little bit of context was my parents had minimum wage jobs. I grew up on a dairy farm that was no longer in business. So I spent my weekends running around, making trails in the woods, riding my old used bike, and had a pocket knife and a hatchet, and had to bale hay on weekends. That was part of my chore to feed the cows. And kind of grew up in one of those type of families where, like, if the fence broke and the cows got out at 3 a.m., every male in the family was out of bed to go like get the cows back in. Right, every
Amazing.
male on the weekends during hay baling season was out baling and stacking hay in the barn. All my family lived on the same street, on the same block, basically, kind of all surrounded on the hills surrounding each other. So you just kind of rode around in the neighborhood and went in and out of each other's houses. That was my childhood. And then when I was 9 years old, I ended up getting a magic kit for Christmas from my grandmother. Not at all what I was interested in, did not ask for a magic kit, was not fascinated by the art of magic or illusion in any way whatsoever. It was super random from my perspective. And so the gift that I never asked for or wanted ended up completely changing the trajectory of my life.
Seriously.
So I didn't see a lot of possibility. It wasn't really much of a dreamer at that age. I'd kind of settled for the status quo, kind of felt like my cards had been dealt, like this was my life in this small town, in a blue collar family. And man, when I did my first trick, it's actually kind of funny because when I learned my first trick, I was like, that's it. That's dumb. No one is ever going to be fooled by this. Right. And I marched into the living room to prove that I was right. Performed my first trick for my mom and dad. And dude, their eyes lit up. They were in complete awe and wonder. Their chins dropped. They were like, whoa, how did you just do that? And I was like, are you serious? And they're like, how did you do that? It was amazing. And now looking back, I understand it was the first time that someone else had looked at me with a look of awe and wonder in response to something that I had done, or at least that I could remember, right? I'm sure that at some point they were like, yeah, you just peed in a toilet by yourself, right?
Sure.
Like you're out of diapers now. There were times that I got celebrated, but I don't have memories of that. So as I kind of get into the age where I can remember things easily from my childhood, 6, 7, 8, I was already starting to get bullied at school. I wasn't the cool kid. I sucked at sports. I wasn't athletic. And so it was hard for me to experience those moments of someone being in awe of me. Just didn't come around very often. And all of a sudden they were. And now that I've studied the neuroscience of awe and wonder, I understand how contagious it is. But at the time, all I knew is that someone was in awe and that something was awakened in me. But what was actually happening is that their wonder reawakened mine, and it gave me permission to believe in the possibility of a whole new story. So that was the beginning of a new chapter for me. Took me a couple years to kind of keep learning magic tricks. Finally found like a couple of mentors and started performing really young. My first show was at 11, my first official show, got paid $25.
Wow.
I was like, this is it. I'm like, I'm going to be rich and famous and travel around the world doing magic shows. And if you fast forward within a few short years, I experienced what felt like the highest of highs as a teenager and the lowest of lows. Experienced everything from childhood abuse with mentors to making 6 figures. So like you take those things and you put in the context of a 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. I remember sitting down at my kitchen table with my parents and them explaining to me. I have this memory of them going, well, you cleared 6 figures this year, and explaining to me that that's more money than they had ever made in 2 years with their salaries combined. Because again, my dad worked in a factory, my mom was a housekeeper.
Wow.
And me just going like, okay, like it felt like I had lots of money, but it's not like they were permitting me to just go spend it on stuff yet, right? Like I was still a kid. So we were reinvesting it back into my business. And at the same time, I have these stories of this intense abuse as a child. I'm trying to make sense of that. But the whole time as a magician, I'm being taught the value of secrecy. And so I just did what really good magicians do, which is kept everything a secret. And so you have this, again, what looks like really a really awesome life as a teenager combined with what feels like hell on earth of carrying around this burden of this untold story that's inside of you. So fast forward, just kept doing what I was doing. By the time I was 18, I performed all across the US. I dropped out of high school to go on the road and tour full time. Ended up finishing high school by way of a homeschooling program that I did on the road. By 21, I'd made $1 million. Left my little small town, moved to Nashville to an expensive suburb and built a big fancy house and parked 2 nice cars in the driveway. And I was like, this is it, the American dream. And by 22, I was bankrupt. And really that season of going from 21 to 22, I think that was the inciting incident that led to me finding, it was really like the beginning of the path that I'm on today, the path back towards healing, of coming to terms with who I am, not just as a performer or a storyteller, but who am I? Who is Harris as a human being? And I had to ask some pretty serious questions about what life is all about. Because when you go from being a millionaire at 21 to being bankrupt by 22, it sort of humbles you and forces you to step back and go, okay, how did this happen? And I had to figure out how it happened and realize that, I'd been tricked into believing a whole bunch of stuff that isn't true. And those lies had quite literally trapped me and paralyzed my life. And I had to find a way to escape that and get out of it.
What were some of the factors? You don't have to get into like tremendous detail, but 21 millionaire, 22 bankrupt, like what happened in that year? Was it just
Sure.
Diving into the lifestyle, frivolous spending, just like thinking it was going to never end, and then it did?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and it didn't really end. Like I made just as much money the year I was 22 as I made, in the years leading up to 21. It's that I moved to an expensive suburb, built a big fancy house. I bought 2 nice cars. I didn't pay cash for them. And even though I had cash, like this is crazy. I specifically remember this guy coming to the front door going, "Hey, has anyone tested your water?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "We're just out doing water tests to, test the cleanliness of your water out of your tap." And I'm like, "Well, no, I don't think so." And he comes in, does this little test in our kitchen, and he was a water like filtration and water softener salesman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he goes through the whole thing and he holds up the 2 capsules and one's dirty after he put the chemicals in it, one's not. I'm just like, oh no. And he's like, well, your neighbors just installed. I'm like, well, if they did it, we've got to do it. I'm like, how much? And he's like, like $4,000 or something. And I'm like, great, let me go get my checkbook. And specifically remember hearing him say, you don't have to write a check, we can finance it. And me going, great, I can spend that $4,000 on something else.
Wow.
And so it was the classic case of keeping up with the Joneses. And it doesn't matter how much money you make. It's never enough if you keep reaching for the illusion of more. And I discovered in that season that some people are so poor, all they have is money. And so my bank account made me look rich for a time. But yeah, it didn't take long for it to all catch up with me.
So this crazy year, 21 to 22, began this change in your life. Take us on the next phase of your life. From there on, what did it look like to get to, bridge the gap between then and now?
Yeah. I started making less money for a while after that. And the reason why is, when I asked myself how I ended up in that position, when I discovered that I had believed some lies about myself that weren't true, and lies about how the world worked in general, that sort of pisses you off, and you're like, oh, how did I get tricked into believing this stuff? Well, that's a pretty ironic question to ask yourself when the way that you have quote unquote succeeded is through your mastery of the ability to trick other people. And what I noticed is that there is a strong correlation between how a magician, the principles that a magician uses to trick people on stage in the context of a magic show, and how all lies and deception work. The only difference between what we call a magician or a marketer or advertiser or a great leader or a salesman or a politician or a con man is just the motivation behind how they're using the principles of persuasion and psychology. Right? If someone uses those same principles that I use as a magician to help people and to change the world, we're like, that person's a great leader. They're a brilliant marketer. If I use those same principles to pick your pockets or to con you, you might be like, that guy's a con man. Well, both people are using the exact same skill sets. The motive behind how they're using those principles of deception and persuasion are just different. And so once I uncovered the fact that I understood how deception worked and it just didn't connect the dots and realized that the principles are universal and they apply to more than just magic tricks, it led to all these epiphanies. And I was like, man, I have the greatest tool in the world to go help people understand how they have been led and tricked into believing the things that they believe. And so kind of took on a more mission-minded approach to my craft, became less of an entertainer, more of a speaker, I guess, for lack of a better words. And, I did that for a few years. In my mid-20s, I was at this school in Michigan, and there was principal walks in. He's like, "Hey, you're the magician." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you understand how to trick people. Like, go help these kids understand how they're getting tricked into believing the things that they believe." And I was just like, "Yeah,
Mm.
I don't know if I'm really a motivational speaker, but I can definitely say something about that probably." But I still wasn't like confident in how to do those types of things. And I remember getting out of a straitjacket at the end of that show. And it was one of the first times I'd gotten out of a straitjacket hundreds of times, but it was the first time that I remember being as raw and vulnerable based on the challenge from this principle, to be just super honest with these high school kids about some of the straitjackets that had trapped and entangled me, and opened up about, being molested as a kid, going through, a few $100,000 worth of debt, how I was trying to dig my way out of it, all these different straitjackets and how they were all rooted in lies. And I just remember like holding up the straitjacket and saying, "I don't know what your straitjacket is, but we all have one. And I want you to know there's always hope. Like, don't give up." And,
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever given a bad talk. That's how I felt about that day. And I was beating myself up, and I was like, that was a horrible attempt. You should have just stuck to being an entertainer. You should have just been a magician. Like, what was this whole like motivational speech at the end? And then as all the kids are filing out and I'm mentally like beating myself up for
Sure.
the bad job I feel I did, there was this girl that starts walking down the bleachers towards me. She's bawling. She has tears running down her cheeks. She walks up to me and she says, "Hey, can I give something to you? I have something for you." And I was like, sure. I didn't know what to do. She held her hand out. I cupped my hands under her hands, and she drops a razor blade into my hand. And she said, "That's my straitjacket, and I don't want it anymore. And you're the first person to ever make me feel like that there's hope." And then she just turned and walked away. Someone came around the corner, like one of the adults, and was like, "Hey guys, back to class." I never even got her name. As she turned and walked away, I saw the scars up and down her arms and wrists. And dude, I became obsessed with trying to understand. I was like, okay, I know we're being tricked and deceived. I know these principles of psychology that I'm using in a magic show are being used in other ways to create these different messages, but like, why that? Why to that level? Why? How could someone become so deceived by these lies that they would harm themselves in that way? Because I had never thought about doing something like that to myself, even though I had my own
Sure.
lies, right?
Yeah.
And that's what sent me down the rabbit hole of research. And where I landed was the power that storytellers have. That we don't just use these principles to persuade, but that we create and craft these powerful narratives that we invite people into to try to control the stories that they tell themselves about who they are. Why? To get them to buy the right brand of jeans, to wear the right makeup, to drive the right car. It's crazy. And so I thought to myself, if storytellers are that powerful, someone ought to be gathering them together to have a conversation about that collective power. Because not only could we call them to responsibility, because with that power comes great responsibility, but we also might be able to leverage that power to shift the narrative and change the future. And so that's really that started another whole chapter of life and work. That was the beginning of my departure from. It solidified my departure from being an entertainer and magician who traveled around and toured around and did magic shows, and more of realizing I'm actually a storyteller who happens to know how to do magic tricks. And somehow I want to gather together and build a network of storytellers and then leverage our collective power to change the future of humanity. So that's what I feel like we've been doing. So that was the beginning of Story Conference. That was at least the beginning for me. And that was 5 years ago. And so we're coming up on our 6th year of leading the story community. And man, they're doing amazing stuff. It's cool.
Well, I'm obsessed with what you're trying to do. Here's why. Like I love magic. I love all kinds of art forms. I love all kinds of these entertainment forms, right? But what I love as someone who has a deeply vested interest in impacting my world, the people around me, and the world, in a larger way, and helping other people do that by living a meaningful life and giving a damn. I'm always looking for, hey, I'm cool if you want to be entertained and if you want to feel good about what's happening in life. Totally. We need those times. But I feel much better about it when you can mix, for lack of a better term, entertainment, being entertained, with something that's going to impact you and help you and, move the needle, right, in your life and the people around you, right? So, for example, I happen upon, whatever, David Blaine, videos on YouTube every once in a while. Fantastic. The guy blows my mind, right? But there's no story attached to it, right? He sits around with a bunch of famous people. He does a thing that seems absolutely impossible. I have no way to explain it, but he does it, right? Frogs coming out of his throat, all this like crazy stuff. There's no story to it. It's mind blowing. But then I go to, what year at Story was it that you did the whole fan snow thing? 2016, 17? You know what I'm talking about, right?
18? Yeah.
So I show up at Story for the first time, and you're starting out the event, you're telling this story, and you have this like piece of paper that's wet in your hand, and you crumple it up in your hand. I forget exactly how the trick, for lack of a better term, evolved, but you're going down the line, all of a sudden you start fanning your hand, and snow starts coming out right out of your hand, and then the fans come on up in the balcony, right, and snow comes down everywhere. And it's this magical moment where it's magic, right, where it's experiencing this trickery before our eyes. But because there's a story attached to it, my heart's beating out of my chest. I'm like, okay, what does this mean for me in life? Like, what am I supposed to take away from it? I don't watch a David Blaine video or any other magician or any other, entertainer that's like, I can feel good about hearing a great song or watching a great film, but I feel much like I don't have that much time. I have very little time. I have a family. I have multiple businesses. I have a lot to do. So I'm looking for people that will entertain me, tell me a story, and move the needle in my life all at the same time. And that's what I think I know that you do really well. Like, you figured out how to keep, you said you stopped the departure from being an entertainer to now being a storyteller. You're still entertaining people for sure. But now it's in a way that, people's hearts are beating, right? Like, now that can also be cheesy. I think you're a person of faith, right? So am I, hanging on for dear life, to be honest, but I'm still in it. I grew up in, very conservative evangelicalism, and there was a lot of that. Like, there's a cheesy way to tell a story, right? There's a cheesy way to connect the dots, right? These people that come in and entertain us in churches and whatever. But the story about the straitjacket, right? You at that school and the girl, like, you entertained everybody. And I'm sure there were others. It wasn't just that girl. I'm positive. I don't even know the story, the setting, where it was. You said Michigan, I think. But there were others that just didn't have the boldness in that moment. But you showed them that there were straitjackets in their lives that they also had and they needed to get rid of. So I'm just obsessed with this idea. And I'm so excited to be talking about this book and story and SoloCon and all these things that you're doing, because I again, we're doing different variations of the same thing, but I'm like, I don't want to do anything else for the rest of my life, but make stuff that helps people move forward, right? That's it, because life's just too damn short,
Well, and I think it helped me come back to terms with what magic really is. You said something important to me there, is that, I was performing trickery, I think you called it, and yet your heart was beating out of your chest.
Oh yeah.
And like, that was the magic. And it's so ironic if you really think about it, because people like you call people like me magicians. And the stuff that I do on stage is referred to as magic. But deep down, we know it's not. It's trickery. They're just illusions. It's totally fake. But yet, there are very real things in the world around us that are deeply, truly magical. But yet, we are either unaware of it, or we look right past it, or we desensitized to it. And we roll our eyes in cynicism and think that stuff is either fake or doesn't matter. And it's like we have things backwards. Why are we calling the fake stuff magic? And why are we looking at the real magic and letting it slip right by us without gripping us in awe and wonder, right? And so I think we need to go back and redefine what magic is again. So the magic that you experienced in that room when I'm quote unquote made it snow is not because it wasn't the trick. It was the story that was told and how it made you feel, right? And to me, if that's magic, then it democratizes the idea of who has the ability to perform magic.
100%.
That means magic is no longer in the hands of only magicians. It means you get to create magic through your work, through this podcast and all of your other businesses. It means every single person that's listening to us right now, they have the opportunity to help other people step into and experience magic through their own work. Because what I'm doing isn't magic, it's just a trick. But if I'm creating the feeling and sense of magic, if people are experiencing magic through a story, well, all of us as human beings have the opportunity to tell stories through our work. And we can get way deep into that, but
no, you tweeted recently about creative, right? This word creative, right? And you said everyone is creative. Not everyone is an artist, but everyone is creative. Change requires creativity. Solving problems requires creativity. Yes, making art requires creativity too, but so does being open-minded and innovative in our personal and professional lives. If you consider and call yourself a creative and spend any time complaining about things in the world you wish were different, may I suggest pausing to consider why it's fair to be annoyed by the lack of change in others when you feel exclusively entitled to getting creative. And many will say, and this, I love this part because I think about this all the time, and I talk about this all the time in different ways. Many will say it's just semantics. It's not, because the language we use to tell stories tells a story, contributing to the narratives that are guiding our thinking and behavior. And if everyone embraced their own unique creativity instead of thinking creative only belongs to a select few, the world would be a much more beautiful place. And then you ended with this random fact. In Tibetan, there's no word for creativity. The closest translation is the word natural. So for Tibetans, to be human is to be creative. May our wonder give us permission to believe the same. Let's use that Twitter thread to jump into your book. I talk with a lot of people that are in, for lack of a better term, they're in 9-to-5s, right? And they work these jobs and they want more for themselves. Now, don't hear me, nobody listening, and I know you won't, but nobody listening, don't hear me saying that working a 9-to-5 at Home Depot is a bad thing. There is dignity in that work. Be the best, Home Depot manager that you can be. 100%. I'm not saying that. And we need people to do these various kinds of jobs in society, right? We need people collecting trash and running our governments and working in the schools. Totally. I'm not saying everybody should just like up and leave. But there are, for one, people need to see the wonder and the creativity in the work that they do, whether you're a Home Depot manager or whether you stock shelves at Walmart, or you're a school teacher for 30 kids that, don't appreciate who you are and you're super underpaid. Or if you're Harris or Nick, telling stories for a living in a variety of different ways. So that's one, is like, let's help people today begin to see the wonder in, they're working at Discount Tire, putting on tires every day. But also, I also want to help. There are people listening right now that know who they are, what they want to do, what they need to do. They're equipped, they're ready, they've been working toward it for years, and they don't want to jump. They don't want to jump out and experience the fullness of their life. And they're stuck for whatever reason. Bills, I get it, school loans and all the pressures of life. But there's so many people, they're not content for all the right reasons with what they're in, and they know they want more. They know they need more, and they're ready to do it. Those are the people that I want to help. Both people, the people that are going to stay in their 9-to-5 and need to find the wonder in that, find the beauty in that, but also there are people listening that need to jump, and they need to jump today. They need to put in their 2 weeks because they're ready to go, but they just don't know how, and they don't know how to capture that. And I think that's precisely why you wrote The Wonder Switch, the difference
Yeah.
between living your life and living your dream. So let's jump into that book. Came out last October, right? Talk about why you wrote it, for whom you wrote it, and kind of what's been happening since you wrote it. Like, what's the feedback you've gotten since writing it?
Whew. Man, you ask questions that could easily turn into like 2 or 3 hour long conversations, right? I mean, there's two things you just said there. For the people at Home Depot or collecting trash or pushing through in the classroom, I don't think our purpose is found in the clock. Whether we work from 9 to 5 or different hours doesn't dictate our purpose. I think our purpose is born out of the pain of our past. And so much of it has to do with how do we take what we feel like is a mess in our life and turn that into some sort of message and meaningful work. And I think everyone has the opportunity to do that, regardless of what their vocation is. So there's plenty to discuss there as it ties back to the book. The other thing is, which really is probably a good place to start, which is, why did I write the book and what does it have to do with what I just said? And I think so much of this is about a journey of belief. I wrote The Wonder Switch because I was heartbroken by the number of people in the world who don't feel like they have permission to believe. And that belief could be anything: a divine creator, belief in the possibility of their own dream, belief in the possibility of healing in a relationship that feels broken, belief in themselves, right? People get stuck often because they don't have permission to believe in the possibility of a new story. So let's rewind just a little bit and go back to the word story. Even the word story tells us a story, right? Seth Godin had a great blog post. I think it was this morning, actually, where I was actually kind of happy about it because he affirmed the Twitter thread that you just talked us through that I posted yesterday.
I read it this morning, and he does.
Yeah. So it's like, the word creative, that has a story. The word church has a story. The name, whatever, always has a story. And so, if you go back to story, we as human beings are storytelling creatures. We are story creatures. We walk around all day long, turning everything into a story in order to make sense of the world, to feel safe, to figure out what happens next. We do this so often that even when we physically sleep at night, we lay in bed, our body is physically asleep, our brain is staying up all night long, telling ourselves more stories.
Yes.
And so we are storytelling creatures. And the human imagination is simply like a virtual reality storytelling tool, right? So all day long in your subconscious, which I think I read recently, I hesitate to even say this because I'm going to mess it up, but I think it's like, it works 700 times. Your subconscious thinks 700 times faster than your conscious thought, right? And so your imagination, even outside of your own conscious awareness, is always fast forwarding in every single story that you find yourself in. And it's asking a very curious question: what happens next? What happens next in this story? What happens next in this story? Which is why if you are sitting in the back seat of an Uber and the driver isn't driving safely because they're texting on their phone while driving, when your heart starts beating a little bit faster, your palms get a little sweaty, that is your imagination fast forwarding in the story, developing an image of what happens next. You don't like that image, so it sends a signal to your nervous system so that you feel fear in your body because it is trying to keep you safe by saying, hey, notice how you feel right now. This isn't a safe situation. You need to find a safe way out of this car or something bad is going to happen. And so we tell ourselves stories oftentimes to stay safe. The problem is that the majority of human beings allow their imaginations somewhere between childhood and adulthood to get hijacked. And essentially, we start misusing our imaginations. And so I used to think that imagination was something that was active when we were kids. And then as we grow up, we sort of stop using them or they become less active. But now I understand that fear, worry, anxiety, that consistent fast forwarding in the future, that worry is a misuse of imagination. And I think our imaginations are capable of so much more. So if we can use our imaginations in destructive ways, or we can use our imagination in productive ways to dream, to create, to innovate, what determines what has control of our imagination? And that's what brought me back to wonder, right? I've always been obsessed with wonder as a magician. I've always felt like, I shouldn't say always, in the later part of my career, I have felt somewhat annoyed by the use of magic tricks to simply trick people for the sake of entertainment. You can kind of see some of that pain turning into purpose, even in my own story that I shared earlier, right? And so because of that, I'm like, what magic is capable of so much more than just like getting one over on somebody or fooling somebody. That sounds like someone that like does pranks for a living, right? I'm like, I don't want a magician and a prankster to feel like they're equivalent of each other. Magic is capable of something so much more beautiful. So in asking that question, I'm like, it's really about wonder. It's about how illusions blur the line between, reality and what isn't reality. And it makes your brain question things and go, wait a second, I didn't think that was possible. What's happening? When you start peeling back the layers and studying the neuroscience, what's happening is your brain is losing its grip on your existing narrative and what you thought was true. And wonder steps in and allows your imagination to become more curious in optimistic, hopeful ways, because you start to go, well, I didn't think that was possible, but maybe more is possible than I realize. I didn't think you could do that with a rubber band or a table or a chair or a ball or a coin or whatever. But now that I just saw what I just saw, I mean, seeing clearly is not believing. So now my beliefs are getting challenged, and that is beginning to change what I see. And so I've started thinking of wonder as, being in a state of wonder gives us permission to believe in a story that we have yet to see. And most human beings do not live this way. So the reason why I wrote The Wonder Switch is to help people understand through these different principles that make magic tricks possible, that what you see is not always what you get. That you as a storytelling creature are walking around all day long telling yourself stories that are rooted in the narrative that you have adopted to be true. And the narrative that's driving all of your thinking and choices and behavior has some lies in it. It's not all built on reality and truth. And so we have to correct those lies so that you get out of thinking seeing is believing. Otherwise, you're going to continue to tell yourself untrue stories like I'm not enough, I don't have what it takes, I don't belong, right? And it'll help you to understand that in the presence of wonder, you can actually find the permission that your brain needs to start believing in the possibility of a new story. And when that happens, we can start to restore the broken parts of your narrative. And that leads to actual, tangible, practical changes in your life, your thinking, your belief systems, your behavior. Seeing is not believing, but believing is seeing, because what we believe has the power to change what we see. So why don't we just believe? Because we don't have permission to believe. But yet when we're in a state of wonder, we have more permission to believe. So it comes to do with how do we cultivate a life of wonder? That's really what the book is about.
When a couple minutes ago, you talked about even this term, childlike wonder, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the goal of your life's work is for it not to be childlike wonder, but human wonder, right?
Yeah.
The goal is to help adults rediscover that wonder, and also help. I mean, I hope that part of the, eventual trajectory of your work, and maybe it's already happening in different ways. I know you talk a lot to leaders and, grown-ups, but like so in my work with Let's Give a Damn, I started Let's Give a Damn, and basically I see my full-time job right now as helping adults, grown-ass adults, unlearn a bunch of stuff that they learned over the years, right? All these lies and all these things that have kept them from believing that they can change their world, not the world. That's an unattainable thing. I think it's helpful to help people see things properly, right? You can focus on changing your world first, right? The people around you, the places around you, right? But it's helping people rediscover that you can make a difference in little ways and in big ways, right? But the ultimate goal, when I started this, I started having parents come to me and say, hey, Nick, you need to figure out how to, tailor this Let's Give a Damn message and idea for kids. Because ideally, they get this when they're younger, and they don't give in to all the lies of growing up and life is hard, and all those things are true. But like it's all, like you said, it's believing is seeing. it's a lot of it's in our head, it's in our mind, it's in how we see things as we grow up. And so I want my kids to not go through all the pain and trauma that I went through, to finally get to my 20s and 30s and realize, oh, I can do a lot more than I think that I'm capable of. I can do a lot more than my parents told me I was capable of, or the people that were around me, or my just surroundings, right? So how do we, first of all, so I'm getting somewhere. One question is, what makes us lose our wonder as children, right? Because kids just imagine and believe anything. They believe everything, not anything. They believe everything. And it's so easy to get, my kids, we just, all day long, we're creating scenarios and worlds and ideas, and they just go along with it and they love it. And I love that. So what are the kinds of things that keep us from doing that as we grow up, teenagers, and then adults? And then also, how do people that are your and my age with our kids, how do we talk to our kids this way? How do we help our kids never lose it in the first place? Maybe that's impossible, but I don't think so. I don't want to believe that that's impossible, that they could just like always have that wonder, that human wonder,
Sure.
not childlike wonder.
Once again, there's so much there to unpack. We get nervous about returning to childlike states and childlike things and childlike play, more childlike imagination, because it feels childish. And there is a difference between what is childish and childlike. And so everything in the world around us, in the narrative, the mass narrative, is saying, hey, grow up, be a man, toughen up, right? But it's really about identifying what our wonder wound was. To answer your question more directly, we lose the magic in our childhood when the magic is robbed, when we become desensitized to the magic because the pain feels bigger than the magic does. So in short, it's trauma, right? But relationships are magical. Love is magical. But as you grow up and you experience a broken relationship, you're like, the magic that I felt in the love wasn't there. And so the story that you tell yourself about love, the place that love holds in your narrative gets shattered, right? Does that mean that love is no longer magical? No, the magic got robbed from your experience of love as a result of the trauma that you experienced. And so, I think a lot of this is about, how do we unlearn? How do we heal from the wonder wounds? That's that beautiful Paulo Coelho quote where he talks about, the journey is not really to become more than we currently are. It's about unbecoming everything that isn't really meant to be you in the first place.
Wow.
It's about a return to that childlikeness while letting go of the childishness. I could talk about that for hours, but that's the short answer to your question. It's the slightly more in-depth answer that isn't just, well, trauma.
No, I obviously would love to talk to you for forever and a day, but I also want to give people enough. I want to wet their whistle enough to like go buy the book, which we'll definitely push. So how do we? So our reality right now is there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world. Not right now. Throughout the entirety of history, in fact, we're better off than any other time in history, right? In terms of, whether it's infant mortality or, poverty, like we're better off, but there's still so much, right? What we had was things are getting way better, but now we know too much, right? We have more access. We have access to more information than anyone in the history of ever has ever had, right? At the tip of our fingers, we open our phone and boom, it's all there. So we know more and we're feeling it. How do we? These are hard times. We've got this still loud, Black Lives Matter movement, which it should be. We've got all this racial tension. We've got leaders in government that are acting, and I don't use this as a derogatory thing because I love my kids and how they act, but like they're acting like children, even though we're paying them adult salaries and asking them to do big and hard things. They're not working together.
Well, it's what I was just talking about. It's childish. You can look at
there
an
you
adult
go.
who's acting childish.
That's good.
And there's a difference between that childish behavior and childlike behavior.
Yeah, no, that's a great distinction. I'm gonna try to incorporate that into how I think, because I always think that way, right? I have these kids that are amazing and I love them, and I'm like, I never want to compare, a Donald Trump to my kid who's just amazing and who loves people, right? Like I don't want to do that. So I like that distinction of childish and childlike. So we've got all these things going on now. This pandemic, right? so much suffering, so much pain. And yet there is so much beauty and so much wonder and so much awe. And really focusing on the pain and the suffering and all the craziness going on in the world isn't going to help us create and make and do better things, right? It's when we focus on the wonder, like some good things come out of pain, right? Again, the Black Lives Matter was born out of tragedy, and we need those ideas and those movements to continue to grow and to affect change in our society and our culture. But most long-term things come out of the wonder, at least in my experience, come out of the wonder and the beauty. So how do we, Harris, help me? You are a positive guy, right? There's people in my life that I look to for that I know I can always go to for, the positive perspective on things, not a fake positive, not a conjured up positive, like a real positive. Brad Montague, you referenced him earlier, amazing individual. You got these I think it's why people still love Fred Rogers, may he rest in peace. We need these hopeful people in our lives. I'm not naturally like that. I am very hopeful, but I'm also a hardcore Enneagram 8, which means I want to burn everything that's bad to the ground. And I'll let somebody else build it up, but I just want to get rid of the bad stuff, right? I'm a challenger, a protector. So I'm not, my first instinct is not to go to positivity. My first instinct is not to go to awe and wonder. It's to, holy shit, there's so many terrible things in the world. I got to go fix everything, right? How do we hold those two things in tension? Bad, evil, horrible things happening, immoral things happening to people that we love, people that we don't know, but we do love as well, the marginalized peoples. And there's still so much amazing beauty in the world. There's still so much to just, I was listening to one of my favorite Brahms pieces last night, one of my favorite movements. And I just was overwhelmed. I'm sitting in my office, 12:30 in the morning, working away, listening to this piece. And I just felt like there was nothing else in the world that mattered in that moment. I'm listening to this piece of music and it's just crushing me in the best of ways. So how do we hold all of this in tension?
I mean, the short answer is that by understanding that there is beauty in the brokenness, that pain can always be turned into purpose. That what feels like a mess can become your greatest message. And I know those have a tendency to sound like pithy quotes that make you roll your eyes, but the thing that's makes people roll their eyes in response to ideas like that is simply cynicism. And
Sure.
cynicism says, yeah, right, I'll believe in that when I see it. And so cynicism says, burn it all down because nothing that you're saying is possible, right? And so we need the hope and the possibility and the permission to believe in it so that we can remain expectant to keep us out of that cynical state that says, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. Instead, we have to go, okay, I can't see it right now, but I'm going to choose to believe. And it's easier to choose to believe when it feels like it's easy to believe and you have permission to believe, which is why we must stay in that state of wonder. So how do we stay in that state of wonder? By staying aware of the magic that is all around us. Roald Dahl famously said, those who don't believe in magic will never find it. It affirms what I'm talking about. A lot of people will say, well, I don't see any magic, so you show me some magic and then I'll believe in it. Well, if the magic is already there. The problem with your inability to see it is because you don't believe in it first. And so again, we have to take a journey of belief. We have to choose to believe. Well, how do we do that? Well, sometimes we just need a spark. That music, that piece that you listened to last night, that's a spark. That's a piece of magic that left you in awe. And scientists are now studying awe. UC Berkeley, especially Science for Greater Good or Center for Greater Good, something like that. They're doing amazing studies on awe. They're realizing that you being in a positive state of awe and wonder decreases chronic inflammation in your body. It can open you up emotionally to other people and help you empathize and connect with other people on a heart level. There's starting to be some hints of research that show that us being in a state of wonder can boost our immune systems, decrease stress, open us up to new narratives, which is what I've been saying for a while. So if you think about the presence of awe among politicians or the presence of awe in the criminal justice system, Imagine the role if wonder and awe creates a sense of open-mindedness to a new narrative, how would that change the way that people who are sitting on the bench and determining, um, the verdict in someone's case? How might that influence influence like their decision-making process if they come in completely open-minded as opposed to holding on to their existing narrative about the person that walks into the courtroom? If a presence of a positive awe state, if presence and wonder can change the physiology in our bodies to the point where it can decrease chronic inflammation, boost our immune system, why are hospital rooms, especially children's hospital rooms, why is everything in that room not designed to keep us in a state of awe and wonder?
Wow.
But instead, we're putting these cheap gowns that make us feel weird, and they're not listening to that piece of music that you listened to last night. They're listening to beeps and sounds of machines and movement. Like, why not give them a soundtrack that leaves them in awe? Why not design the colors of the room instead of feeling so sterile to invoke their childlike imagination? Why not let them play to the extent that their body is capable of playing? So, it really just comes down to, how do we heal the wonder wound? What's wounding our wonder? What's robbing us of the magic, and how do we get it back? And if it's been robbed, then the journey back to wonder, the journey back to finding the permission that you need to believe, really has to do with healing. What was the trauma that broke the narrative, and how do we restore it?
Yeah, it's so powerful. Like, right, hurt people, and healed people heal people. And
And
so,
we are hurt in community, which means we are healed in community.
yep.
Like, your pain, though you might experience remnants of pain alone, but the pain that you've experienced in your life is the result of trauma that you experienced in relationship, which means that your only way to heal is not to sit in a room by yourself, but to heal in community and relationship.
And as our adult, as we grow up and more pressures and more things in life, we see it as more impossible as the years go by to go back and do some of that healing work, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard work, and it takes time, and it takes community, and it takes hard conversations, and it takes therapy, and it takes so many things that we just don't have time for, right? And so but what we don't see is that the longer that we put it off, the more hurt we get, the more hurt we hurt, the more times we hurt those around us, and
Sure.
the more compounding that hurt becomes. We become more complexively hurt, whatever that word is. Like, we become more, we just become more hurt, and it just compounds, right? And man, I love that so much. And so let's focus in for the last part of our conversation on this idea of hurting and healing in community, by talking about, we've talked about your book, we talked a little bit about Story Conference, the story gatherings, but I want to talk about this new thing that you're working on, which I think this will help us kind of tie as much of a neat little bow on this conversation, because again, we could do so much more. Maybe we'll do it another time. But this solo con that you're doing, this new global community of solopreneurs who are changing the future through purpose-driven work. You tweeted something or you Instagrammed something the other day that I just love. I'm going to think about it forever and ever, probably. But flying solo is a myth. This applies to people that are creating stuff, but it also just applies to life, right? It applies to all parts of our lives. Flying solo is a myth, and we are going to heal faster, and we're going to do more, and we're going to do better in community. So talk about this idea of, and you and I talked, I think it was before the recording, about the kind of work that we do. We have little teams around us, and we have people that do stuff with us, but we're, as society would call us, solopreneurs. We're just going at it alone. Like, all of my companies and projects have my name on it at this point. And it's like, I just, nobody else is telling me to start it, and nobody's stopping me. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So yeah, it's hard. I long to be around more people to do stuff with, and I crave that. So let's talk about that for the last few minutes. What is SoloCon really about? What's the heart behind it? And let's dive into that for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, much like Story, Story is what it is today because, not the only reason, but one of the reasons it is what it is today is because I was trying to curate the conference that I felt like I needed as a storyteller that I couldn't find. And SoloCon is really the same. It's the conference for solopreneurs like me that I need, because I'm working far too often in isolation. And so I'm going to create it because I don't feel like I'm alone in that need. And a lot of it came down to the story that I think words have, which is kind of a fun way to bring this conversation full circle. I think it's one of the places we started, but there's sort of two words out there to describe the paths outside of the world of nonprofits, I should say, is the caveat. So it's like, are you a freelancer or you're an entrepreneur? And everyone wants to call themselves entrepreneurs these days. I don't know why. I guess it sounds sexier. Like everyone seems like, oh, he's an entrepreneur, she's an entrepreneur. And yet if there's a very different path associated with being a freelancer compared to being an entrepreneur. And I just annoyed by don't call yourself an entrepreneur if you're not one, not because you're trying to sound cooler, but it's going to hold you back from getting the resources and following the proper path that you need to follow to achieve what it is that you feel called to do. And so to me, freelancers find joy and meaning in their craft, right? Maybe you're a graphic designer and you're like, I just love the graphic design. It doesn't matter if I'm doing graphic design for Joey's flooring company or Susan's ice cream shop. I may not be as passionate about ice cream as she is, but it doesn't matter. I love graphic design and she seems like an awesome lady. And so I'm just going to do that. The other thing about freelancers from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a business perspective, is they get to work on their own schedule. They set their own hours and they're exchanging their hours for income, right?
Yep.
People like me their mindset is slightly different. Again, it's not better. It's just different in the sense that it's not always about the specific craft that I'm performing. It's about the message that I'm trying to share. And by that, I don't just mean as a speaker or an author in a traditional sense of delivering a message or a communicator. It's that I have some sort of pain in my past that I experienced. And I don't want other people to have to go through what I went through. And if they have, I want to help them heal the way that I have healed. And as a result, I have chosen commerce, a business, as my vehicle for creating the future in the world that I want to create. And so if I go, okay, great. So you're not a freelancer, you're an entrepreneur then. If I subscribe to Entrepreneur Magazine and join a community of entrepreneurs or a network of entrepreneurs, and I go to a conference for entrepreneurs, I immediately have to take at least half of what they are teaching me and discard it because it's not relevant to the path that I have chosen. Because they go, oh, you want to scale and you're not interested in scaling and like you don't have an exit strategy. You're not building something that you're going to sell to someone else. You're not going to go public. Like you're not really a founder or an entrepreneur. Like you should go to the freelancers conference. And so I've always sort of felt trapped in between these two worlds. And when a buddy said, oh, you're a solopreneur, I was like, that's interesting. I Google it. Well, all the definitions of a solopreneur are people who work alone or people who are freelancers who don't have a team. And I'm like, well, I'm not that either.
Right.
But I got so annoyed. I was like, you know what? Instead of feeling like that isn't me, what if I just reclaimed that word and reinvented and redefined it? And so that's sort of what I'm on a mission to do, because I don't think I'm alone in the process of trying to build a company that is rooted in building a brand that is so much bigger than me. So yes, I am scaling to the sense of this gets to grow far beyond me, far beyond what hours I have available in a day. But like my name and face is still on this thing, not because I'm selfish or want to be in the spotlight, but because it is uniquely rooted in my pain from my past. This is my purpose. And I'm not interested in selling it. I can't sell Harris III. I am Harris III. Like I can't develop an exit strategy if the reason I founded this company to begin with was to add meaning and purpose back into my work. And so why would I ever part ways with it until my life here is over, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's too many people who feel the same way, but yet because of the idea of being a solopreneur, because you are the brand, I think end up feeling trapped in isolation, and they feel like they can't scale, they can't grow a team. But I think having a team doesn't disqualify you from being a solopreneur, because flying solo is a myth. A pilot who flies solo, someone still built the plane. And you sure as hell better hope that there's someone in a tower on a headset if it gets cloudy or it's nighttime who's going to help you land from the tower, right? A solo artist, the people we call solo artists, they're usually surrounded by musicians on stage with them. And even if they're not, and they're singing to tracks or something, or they're a singer-songwriter with an acoustic guitar, there's someone at a soundboard, there's 100%. Someone who built the guitar, there's an audience they're co-creating that live experience with. So I don't know, I got frustrated enough. I'm like, I think we need to craft a new narrative around what it means to be a solopreneur. And so we're going to build a community of solopreneurs and do an annual conference style gathering called SoloCon.
I love this conversation. I love this idea. I too have struggled through the same exact thing in my head, where I have gone through seasons where I've called myself an entrepreneur, but solopreneur makes more sense. But there's a lot of parallels between what you just said and what I'm going through personally. Like this whole let's give a damn thing is tied to me. Um, it, I didn't think that it was that original or unique when I started it. But if you Google let's give a damn, it's all my stuff for pages on Google. Like I didn't do that. That was accident. That is the way this thing has evolved. So it's intricately tied to who I am. And I've been struggling through, not really struggling, that's a bad word, but it's like, what things that I am building can I give away, and how do I give it away, and who do I bring into it? Right? It's hard because it's still like this is my passion. This is what I think that I'm built to do and what I'm going to be doing for a long, long time. But I know full well that I can't go at it alone. I am, working way too hard right now, and I'm trying to find different people to bring into my circle to help me take this thing to the next level. But there's still that struggle of like, how much of who I am do I give away? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, who do
I know exactly what you're saying.
I've got all these trademarks and all these companies, and it's like, how do I build this thing in a way that brings the right people into it? Because you're so right. This one of my least favorite things when people talk about, specifically about money. They're a self-made millionaire or a self-made billionaire. And I'm like, no, they're not. Nobody, not a person on this planet is self-made. There are 1 million people along the way that helped that millionaire become a millionaire. The word self-made should never be put on anybody, whether you're talking about money or a business, because I love the idea of, a singer-songwriter gets up there. There are 100 people that went into making that night happen. The bartender, the people showing up, the person who made the guitar, the chair, the microphone. Like there are so many people that were involved in making it possible for that person to get up there and sing their song and play their music, right?
Yeah, correct. But yet, even though they are aware of that, even if they are a solo artist with humility, they don't feel shame by being called, oh, you're a solo artist. And yet, I would imagine if you're anything like me, if someone says, oh, you're a solopreneur, shame may not be the first word that comes to mind, but there's this sense of like, oh no, man, like this isn't about me. Like I'm not the only one. There's a whole team behind this thing. There's almost like this immediate need to apologize or explain yourself, which then I think is what creates that sort of subconscious pressure we feel to be like, oh no, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm trying to like build something big. It's not just about me. And so I want to reclaim the word solopreneur and strip the shame from it. And maybe even strip the idea of being an entrepreneur of some of its sexiness, so that we also simultaneously don't feel this temptation to be like, oh, but I want to call myself an entrepreneur because I don't want people to be like, oh, you're a solopreneur. Oh, that's a bummer. I thought you were an entrepreneur. It's like, I thought you were ready to play in the big leagues. Like solopreneur is not a downgrade. They're the most purposeful, meaning-driven entrepreneurs on the planet. They are a type of entrepreneur. They're a class of entrepreneur. They're not the same, but we're in the same category, and hopefully we can change that.
I love that so much, man. Well, I'm in. I will be part
April
of April
22nd, April 23rd, man. We haven't even unveiled it. Everything's done. Like all the work is done. The conference programming is, it's just not live. So by the time people hear this episode, it will be live. But yeah, solocon.com. And then we're excited on the heels of SoloCon, which is again happening April 22nd, 23rd. We hope to continue building this community of solopreneurs. And I think we're just going to call it SoloCon Valley. So if you come be a member of the Valley.
I love that.
I
love that so much. Who are you? Let's wrap up with this. Who are you? So you're out there giving, right? And you're creating and you're making and you're bringing people into the fold. But who's taking care of Harris? Like, who are you learning from? Who are you gleaning from? Who are the people, places, and things that are teaching you physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, all of that? How are you growing during this season of life?
Oh man, through friends and mentors. Seth Godin has been an amazing mentor of mine from afar through his blog. When I sent him a copy of my book, I had no idea what to expect, and he emailed back with not only with an endorsement, I didn't even make it to the endorsement because I was sitting at the bar in my kitchen and I was like, oh my gosh. And I started crying. And my wife, Kate, was like, what's wrong? And I was like, Seth Godin just sent me an endorsement for my book. And he was like, what did it say? I was like, I don't know. I didn't read it yet. He's like, then why are you crying? And I was like, the first line was just, Harris, I got your book. I just read it. I'm blown away by this. And so that was the foray into me being able to ask him some more questions. And the combination of that with with just his daily blog and his books, he's been a big mentor and shaped a lot about how I see the world. On a more relational perspective, my friend Ken Black is probably the strongest mentor in my life right now. He used to be the VP of Design Future at Nike, left Nike to go start a company, sold that company back to Nike, did another stint at Nike, but has worked on everything from, Jordan stuff within Nike to the Olympics, and is now a chief creative officer for a while at a creative agency. And I don't, who knows what he's going to do next, but he's been a huge source of inspiration and guidance for me. And then all these story speakers, my story family, Brad Montague, Jillian Farabee from Cirque du Soleil. They teach me in ways that I think they are not even aware of, I think almost on a weekly basis, and Brad doesn't even know this, but we were standing backstage at Story one year. And actually, I think it was 2018, the year where you were talking about. And there was a highlight video playing, and we were about to go on stage together to close out the conference. And he looks over at me and he says, Harris, you did it again, buddy. And I said, did what? And he goes, look out there, man, all those lives that you've impacted in the last 2 days. I was like, oh, Brad, man, there's still so much to do. And he looks at me, and in the exact words, I can hear his tone of voice. He just goes, oh, buddy, and gave me this huge hug and just embraced me and hugged me. And I started bawling. And I think about that conversation almost weekly because I'm trying to remind myself, like, Harris, you don't have to do it all. You don't have to fix all of the world's problems. And you can't. Even if you wanted to, you can't. Like, it's impossible. And so instead of always, instead of feeling the temptation to like step in and raise your hand and be like, I'm the one who can fix that, to instead focus on building communities of people and then releasing them to take that vision and go out in the world and change the future of humanity as storytellers, as solopreneurs, as entrepreneurs, as freelancers, as whatever they are. Because yes, I feel this constant burden that there is so much to change and there is so much to do, but I can't do it alone. And to rest in being aware, to live and work with the awareness of the impact that I am having, because that impact can serve as fuel for me to keep doing what I'm doing. So people simple things like that, little exchanges backstage, Brad, I have no idea the impact.
Brad is the closest thing that I know to a real life angel. Like I cry on a regular basis just looking at a Instagram post from him. It just floors me. Like his brain and his heart, it's as big as the world. I love it so much. Mm-hmm. Harris the third, harrisii.com, right? That's your website. People can find out about all the things. I mean, there's just so much going on, SoloCon and story gatherings and all the stuff that you're doing. Man, I think the world of you. Please keep helping people, because it is helping people. It's helped me from afar, up close and afar. And I'm excited to share your story and what you're doing with the Let's Give a Damn family. So thanks for joining.
Man, it's my pleasure. I'm trying really hard. I've not done it perfectly, made some mistakes, had some shortfalls, done a lot of work and healing, and I'm going to keep going. We're going to continue to learn and push forward and change the future.
Dear friends, thank you so much for spending some time with Harris and me today. Go purchase the Wonder Switch from your local bookstore and visit harristhethird.com, harrisii.com, to learn more about everything Harris is up to and everything he is creating and will continue to create. And please visit letsgiveadamn.com to learn more about what we're up to and what we're building and how you can get involved. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I'm so grateful that so many of you show up week after week after week to listen to these meaningful conversations. This episode was edited and sound designed by the team at Sound On Studios. You can find out more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. The music is by our friend Propaganda, and please remember, you can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. I love you all. Be safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.